The yellow school bus wheezed like an asthmatic dragon as it wound through the switchbacks of Blackwood Pass. Frost-bitten pines leaned over the road, their shadows flickering across the windows in uneven stripes, as though the forest were trying to barcode the children inside. Mrs. Samira Hale, 36 excavator, turned special education teacher, counted heads for the third time. 8 students, 8 fragile worlds, some humming, some rocking, one tracing invisible constellations. Against the fogged glass, a low hum of seatbelt buckles and Velcro straps filled the aisle. Tender routines that kept electric storms of sensory overload at bay. Hale thumbed a quick text to the principal ETA T45. Kids fine, road clear, then tucked her phone away. Outside, a ragged ridge split the winter sky. Jonas, the paraprofessional, tapped the driver's shoulder and pointed ahead. A lone hitchhiker, coat hood up, stood by the mile marker. The driver slowed, thought better, rolled on. 2 curves later, the bus slipped beyond cell service, radio, crackling into static that sounded like someone exhaling a prayer. At 4:18 p.m. Back at Edgeview High, the parking lot was a mosaic of minivans and frayed nerves. Sodium lights buzzed as parents checked screens, checked watches, checked each other's faces for reassurance they didn't feel. Arman Malik paced a figure 8 between 2 oil stains. His daughter Layla never handled late dinners well. Let alone late arrivals. He dialed Hale, heard voicemail, felt the bottom of the world's tilt. Maybe the bus blew a tire, muttered Mrs. Flores, hugging a thermos the way survivors hug memory. Or they stopped for snacks. Another parent offered. Arman shook his head. Samira's to buy. A siren wailed not from the road but from a mother's phone. GPS loss alert. 10 more pings followed, an electronic swarm. Principal doors emerged, tire skew. They've lost tracking for about 20 minutes, he announced, voice paper. County sheriff is mobilizing. Dawes's words scattered like pigeons. Nobody caught any comfort in the flutter. Wind knifed through the lot. Parents huddled in anxious knots, swapping half-baked theories, kid revolt, engine failure, mountain lion attack. Arman caught himself ranking each scenario's probability, the way he once calculated mortgage rates, cold numbers to cage hot. Fear. 30 miles away, the sheriff's SUV fishtailed onto the pass. Deputy Calloway radioed forward. No skid marks, no stalled vehicle, nothing. Just darkness, trees, and the road's blind faith in tomorrow. Snow began to feather downward, erasing clues even as they formed. Back at Edgeview, doors opened the auditorium as an impromptu command center. Fluorescent lights made every face look victimized. Volunteers printed maps, laid them across the stage like oversized autopsy photos. A grandmother traced a trembling finger along the highlighted route, whispering, "Find them." As if maps obeyed prayers, Arman's phone finally rang, an unknown number crackling like distant fire. A man's voice, low and wet, said, "The mountain keeps what it's shown," then hung up. Arman stared at the screen, pulse in freefall. He replayed the sentence until the words felt forged from stone. 9:03 p.m. Sheriff Boone stepped to the mic stand and AV. Kid had rigged from leftovers. He removed his hat-gray hair, storm eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. The bus's tracker stopped transmitting 3 miles past Blackwood Lookout. "We found the last GPS ping, then nothing." Gasps rippled. Boone continued, slower. "Search teams will deploy at first light. Tonight, we need lists of medications, sensory triggers, emergency contacts. Help us, help your kids." Silence swelled, huge and suffocating. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim. Parents scribbled, pills, allergies, comfort objects. Arman wrote Layla plush rabbit, lavender oil. Then pressed the pen so hard it split. Outside the auditorium, snow gathered in soft conspiracies along the windowsills. Headlights came and went, ferrying deputies, journalists, good Samaritans, bearing coffee urns. In the distance, the mountain loomed, black against black. An unblinking witness nobody could subpoena. Arman stepped into the cold. Somewhere up there, Layla might be waiting for a voice she recognized. He pulled out his phone, hit record, and began to speak slow, steady, a bedtime cadence she loved. "Sweetheart, it's Baba. Hold your rabbit tight, I'm on my way." He hoped the wind would carry it. He hoped anything would carry it. Inside the auditorium, the command screen flashed a looping satellite. View forest canopy rendered in pale green polygons, each contour line a threat. A volunteer meteorologist pointed at the spiraling ice. "Low pressure front, arriving by midnight," she warned. Boone rubbed his temples. "Give me your worst case scenario, whiteout." Temperature dropped to 22, wind chill in the teens. Boone glanced toward, the parents crowded at the doors. "Then we hunt in the teeth of it." Across the room, Armin found himself staring at the projector's glow until everything else receded. In its grainy pixels, he saw Layla's last morning, her shy half-wave, the loose braid draped over her neon jacket, the way she signed "Love You" across the glass. The image refused to fade, searing into his resolve like a brand. Outside, snow kept falling, erasing footsteps before anyone could follow them. Above, Lone Ranger readied at dawn, walking into the unknown. Luis Ortega had seen things rot in the wild deer carcasses, bloated with flies. Collapsed cabins with mattresses blackened by mold and memory. But nothing unnerved him more than silence where sound should live. He hiked through the icy blue haze of dawn. Boots crunching over earth. Each step toward Blackwood Ridge Campground tightened the knot behind his ribs. He wasn't just a ranger this morning. He was the first responder to a vanishing act written in the ink of snow and fear. Blackwood Ridge sat in a horseshoe-shaped clearing surrounded by forest so dense it seemed to pulse with its own breath. According to the permit, this was where Mrs. Hale and her class were scheduled to Campton Humans total, counting aides. But when Luis broke through the tree line at 6:47 a.m., the first thing he noticed was how pristine the site looked. 2 pristine. 10 sleeping bags, all rolled, all clean, all dry, lined up in a row like a store display. Not one looked slept in. The firewood stack was untouched. Not even a splinter on the ground. The kindling was still bundled with twine, like it had been laid down but never sparked. Luis squatted beside a folding table. Half a peanut butter sandwich sat there, perfect crescent bite taken out. The crust hadn't even hardened. That's when his pulse started to stutter. He called out once, "Mrs. Hale." "Jonas." His voice slapped back at him off the trees. No reply, no rustling, no birdsong, no insects. Just that awful, perfect stillness. He made a slow sweep of the campsite, eyes trained on detail. On the far edge, near the tree line, he spotted something that made his heart drop into his boots. A wheelchair, small powder blue, modified with extra back support. One wheel was still spinning slightly. He knelt and gently touched the push handle. Ice cold. 10 feet away, dragged lines in the dirt. Like something or someone had been pulled from the chair and vanished into the woods. Luis reached for his radio. "This is Ranger Ortega, at Ridge Site. I've got no sign of the class. Camp's intact, but unused. There's indications of struggle. Send forensics, send backup. We may be dealing with an abduction." His fingers trembled slightly as he released the button. Then he noticed the tree. Rough-barked cedar, maybe 200 years old, stood just off the trail. At chest height, it bore shallow horizontal claw marks, more irregular spacing. Not from a cougar. These weren't animal, they looked frantic. Human. Luis pulled out his penlight and illuminated the bark. Carved into it, thin and fresh, were 2 letters. J.H., Jonas Hale. Just below that, tucked into the crook of the roots, something gleamed. Luis knelt, brushing aside leaves and pine needles. A flashcard, laminated, spotted with something dark, blood. The card had a raised braille pattern. He didn't read braille, but someone had scrawled letters across it in Sharpie. Trust. Luis stared at the word like it was a riddle left behind for him alone. Behind him, the wind moaned through the trees like it had a name it was too scared to say. He backed away from the tree and snapped a photo of every single kid's carvings, chair. Then, just as he turned toward the trail to mark his perimeter, something clicked. A faint sound, mechanical, repeating. He followed it to the other side of the camp, past the tents, There, resting in the crook of a tree stump, was a white noise machine, portable, battery-powered, still on. Luis tilted his head. It was set to heartbeat. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. Every kid in the special ed unit had sensory needs. Noise machines were often used to calm overstimulated students, but this one was left running alone. Looping a heartbeat into an empty forest, he shut it off. The quiet that followed was worse than the sound. Luis stood still for several minutes, just listening, watching, breathing. He looked up at the mountain range ahead where the sun hadn't yet touched. He knew there were dozens of old ranger trails up there, some unmarked, some forgotten. Places even GPS couldn't trace. Places you could disappear into. He keyed his radio again, voice lower now. Expanding search area beyond perimeter. This wasn't a campsite, it was a stage. He started walking toward the tree line, following the faint groove in the earth, just wide enough for a body to be dragged. As he entered the trees, the light grew dimmer, the air colder. Branches closed in around him like arms. Behind him, 10 sleeping bags sat in perfect silence, like tombs without names. And in his pocket, the flashcard with a single word, trust. Ahead, something moved between the trees. A faint flutter, like fabric. Luis froze. It looked like a child's jacket, red, fluttering from a branch. But when he stepped closer, it wasn't a jacket at all. It was another flashcard, pinned with a twig, spinning gently in the morning air. This one said, Fiondi me. He didn't hesitate. He stepped into the woods, into the dark. The town of Edgeview didn't sleep that night. Not really. Flickering porch lights, police scanners echoing from cracked windows, murmured prayers on repeat. By sunrise, the story had gone national. By noon, it had metastasized. 8 disabled students, 1 teacher, 1 aide, vanished. Headlines with bold fonts and blurry photos, hashtags stacked like digital candles. At the center of the chaos stood Detective Amina Kurashikot, drenched, boots caked with roadside sludges. She stepped out of her rental car and into the eye of a storm that hadn't yet reached its peak. She wasn't the type to be shaken by hysteria. But this was different. Amina specialized in missing persons. She had solved 4 child abduction cases in the last 2 years, each uglier than the last. But never had a whole group evaporated like vapor off a lake, and never a group so vulnerable. As she entered the makeshift command Centaur converted gymnasium with the smell of panic. Baked into the walls, she was greeted with a thin-lipped nod from Sheriff Boone. 56 cowboy hat welded to his skull, spine straight with suspicion. We didn't request feds, he grunted. I'm not a fed, she replied coolly, holding up her badge. State Task Force. You're under my jurisdiction now, Sheriff. Boone didn't blink. You'll want to talk to Ortega. Ranger found the site. I've already seen the report, she said, glancing at the wall where maps, timelines and photographs were pinned like trophies from a losing war. I'm here for what's not in it. She moved with intention, military precise, like someone who didn't need to rehearse dominance. Her eyes darted across the board. Sleeping bags untouched. Wheelchair abandoned. Flashcards, one reading trust, the other find me. She turned to the sheriff. No signs of struggle. None. But that's the weird part. It's too damn clean. Not even a sock left behind. Amina raised an eyebrow, which means it wasn't panic. It was planning. Meanwhile, in a dark conference room at the back of the school, Armon Malik sat alone, staring at a family photo on his lock screen. Layla's smile frozen in pixels. The principal, Mr. Dawes, walked in with a grimace and a paper cup of vending machine coffee. Mr. Malik Dawes began. I know this is beyond terrifying. I promise we're doing everything. Armon cut him off, voice sharp. When's the last time you spoke to Samira Hale? Dawes paused. 3 days ago. She texted about needing backup staff. Said the new paraprofessional was struggling with boundaries. Jonas Dawes nodded, seemed overwhelmed. That's all. Armon's brow furrowed. Then why'd Samira file for a restraining order? Dawes blinked. What? Armon pulled out his phone. A friend in the county clerk's office. It was filed, quietly, 10 days ago. No details, just persistent harassment. Dawes paled. Why didn't anyone? Because no one pays attention when a woman speaks quietly, Armin snapped. Across town, at a gas station nestled between a diner and a bait shop, surveillance footage from 2 nights ago played on a cracked screen. Detective Amina Qureshi leaned forward, studying the time stamp. 3:42 a.m., Jonas stood at pump 4, alone, hunched under his hoodie. He wasn't pumping gas, just standing. Watching the road, he looked over his shoulder, eyes wide like he'd heard something behind the camera. Then, without warning, he turned and walked out of frame. Where's the next angle? She asked the clerk. The man shook his head. That's it, no car, none that stopped. Amina exhaled slowly. You're telling me the last person seen connected to this trip was wandering a gas station alone in the middle of the night? 40 miles from the trail. Yes, ma'am, and then vanished. Yes, ma'am. Back in the command center, Boone growled into his radio. Units reporting nothing from the Ridgeno heat signatures. No smoke, no signs of campfire. Amina watched the live drone feed on the screen. Rows of trees, snow-dusted boulders, motionless silence. Then something flickered. She leaned closer. Rewind 10 seconds. The tech rewound, paused. There, just barely. A smudge, no dash movement. Something darted behind a cluster of trees. She stared. Enhance that frame. Pixelated, blurry, but unmistakable. A figure in a neon coat, child-sized running. She pointed. Mark that grid. Mobilize a unit. Boone hesitated. Could be a false positive. Or could be one of your kids freezing to death. He grumbled, but nodded. 3:02p.m. A second parent reported a phone ping. This one wasn't a message. It was a live GPS signal, short-lived, bouncing through a ranger station Wi-Fi. At the base of the mountain, it came from Jonas's phone, found in a locker that had been locked from the inside. Luis Ortega, who discovered it, said the padlock wasn't broken. It was braided shut with colored yarn, like the kind Jonas always carried on his wrist. Amina stared at the evidence bag containing the phone. Why would he leave his phone? She asked aloud. Luis shrugged. Unless he didn't. She gave him a look, then quietly said, Someone's playing with us. The rain returned as dusk fell, tapping against the metal roof like a ticking clock. The mountain loomed out the window, silent, watchful. Amina stood before the board, studying the photos of each missing child. One by one, she whispered their names. Layla, Ezra, Miller, Jordan, Caden, Bella, Sareem, Roxy. Their eyes stared. Back then she noticed something. Each child's school file had a different emergency code phrase words used when something was wrong but couldn't be said aloud. Every phrase was designed to trigger a response from staff. And 2 of those phrases had been written onto the backs of the flashcards found at the scene. Trust, find me. These weren't clues, they were calls for help. Amina stepped back from the board, heart pounding. The kids were still out there, they'd left messages, they were trying to be found. She turned to Luis. Get me a topographical map of every cave system, mineshaft and ravine within 5 miles of Blackwood Ridge, and bring the canine unit. We move out before dawn. Luis hesitated. What do you think we're going to find? Amina stared out the window. A trail, then softer, or a trap. The storm rolled in with a growl-fat droplets on pine needles, the sky bruised, like it had taken a punch it hadn't deserved. Ranger Luis Ortega parked his truck halfway up a logging road known only to lifers. Like him, roads long erased from official maps. He killed the headlights and sat in the dark for a beat, listening. Rain pelted the roof, like questions he couldn't answer. Amina sat beside him, coat zipped, jaw tight. This is where the GPS last pinged. Luis nodded. Just below this. Ridge Jonas's phone. But there's something I need to show you first. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a weathered, leather-bound journal, edges curled, pages stained. He handed it over slowly. Been keeping that since the rezoning in 2013, he muttered. Wasn't supposed to. Might get me fired. Maybe worse. Amina opened it, scribbled maps, date logs, marker flags, names, and symbols. Page after page of backdated entries. Illegal timber extraction. Luis nodded. Started as small stuff, a few crews, mostly after dark. Then it grew. Bigger trucks, bigger payoffs. Trees started falling in areas that were supposed to be protected. He pointed to one entry. This spot. Just 2 miles from Blackwood Ridge. Amina's eyes narrowed. You think the kids saw something? Or someone thought they did? He hesitated. I didn't think it was connected until I found the trail cam I'd set up months ago. Ripped out. Memory card gone. Someone knew. She flipped forward in the notebook and paused. June 8, 2022, saw Samira again. Told her not to bring the kids this way. She smiled like she understood. But she booked the permit anyway. Amina looked up sharply. You warned her. She said they needed the time away. That the kids deserved real nature. Said she'd keep to the Eastern Trail. Luis looked away. But that wasn't where they camped, was it? No, it wasn't. Rain picked up. As they climbed out of the truck and began hiking into the thick woods, each step squelched, the world dimming around them. Amina held the flashlight low. Luis scanned the ridgeline with binoculars. Ranger station's about a mile west, he said. But there's an old maintenance cabin halfway. Nobody's used it in years. They didn't speak much on the hike, just the rhythm of breath, and mud and branches slapping their legs. As they crested a ridge, Amina spotted something in the clearing below. A shed, squat, half collapsed, and something else, tire tracks. Fresh, not from a ranger vehicle. Something heavier, and not in any of the incident reports. They reached the door, padlocked. Luis raised an eyebrow. That wasn't there last month. Amina knelt and examined it. Locks scratched. Someone's opened and closed this recently. Luis broke it open with a crowbar. The door groaned as it swung wide. Inside, dust, rot, and something unexpected. Pine-scented air fresheners. Hanging in rows like someone had tried to disguise something else, in the center of the cabin, sat a child-sized camping chair, torn, dried, applesauce on the tray, a plush octopus on the floor nearby. Layla's Amina whispered. She carried that thing everywhere. Luis moved to the far corner, where he found a pile of ropes. Knotted, reknotted, again and again. Carefully, obsessively, Amina recognized it instantly. Jonas, she crouched. The knots weren't just random, they formed a pattern, a kind of map, threads crossing like paths on terrain. Coordinates, she asked, or a warning. Amina picked up one knot. A tiny metal ring was tied into it, not a toy, a wedding ring. What the hell? She scanned the inside of the band. Engraved ER and SH-1999 ER. She muttered. Louise stepped back, pale. Evan Rourke. School board chair. Amina's eyes went hard. Samira Hale and Evan Rourke. Suddenly it clicked. Samira's confidential restraining order. Her whispers about being watched. The mismatched camping permit assigned to Blackwood Ridge instead of the regular trail. Evan Rourke was having an affair with Samira, she said slowly. And she tried to end it. He was desperate to keep her quiet. Luis nodded grimly. And maybe Jonas heard something he shouldn't have. Maybe the kids did too. Amina took a step back, breathing hard. He used this logging operation to cover up more than deforestation. They exited the shed, flashlights cutting through the rain like blades, as they reached the trail. Amina's radio buzzed static, then a voice. Teacher was crying. They said we're not going home. The transmission cut. She grabbed the mic. Dispatch, confirm origin of last signal. A pause. Then, that came from Jonas Hale's emergency beacon. But, it's bouncing. Location, unconfirmed. Amina froze. Jonas was alive. He had a beacon, and he'd just told them Samira was alive too. She turned to Luis. We need to go deeper. Luis hesitated. You don't get it. Past this ridge. The trails vanish. This is where the trees grow teeth. Amina didn't blink. Then let them try to bite. They stepped into the forest, past where the map ends. Behind them, the cabin stood, still, reeking of pine and guilt. Ahead of them, Truth waited with a knife in its hand, before he ever vanished into the trees. Jonas Hale had already mastered invisibility. Born with nonverbal autism and a sensory processing disorder, Jonas didn't speak, didn't smile on command, and didn't look anyone in the eye unless he had something to say. His world was one of textures and rhythms, loops and knots, while others memorized multiplication tables. Jonas memorized the way shadows moved across floors, the sound of shoes on linoleum, the weight of silence in a room full of people pretending they saw him. His mother called him her little architect. Of string, he'd braid yarn into messages only he could read. Emotions made tactile. Fear was tight knots. Joy was loose loops. Love was woven bands with colored beads in the middle. His room was a soft maze of threads strung between furniture like spider silk. He never needed words, but nowadays, after vanishing with the other students, words were all anyone wanted from him. Detective Amina Qureshi stood at the lip of an old mineshaft with Luis Ortega beside her, both staring down into a blackness so dense it looked like the earth had blinked. A tangled piece of hoodie fabric blue and frayed clung to a rusty nail just below the entrance. Jonas's HOODIE. Luis muttered. There's a system of tunnels beneath this ridge. Old copper mines from the 40s, caved in mostly. Amina squinted. Downward, but not all of it. They secured a rope and began the descent, boots scraping stone. The air grew colder, damper. Flashlights bounced against slick rock, illuminating faded graffiti symbols, names. Some words scratched in by bored teens or haunted men. But one section stopped. Amina mid-dash, step. Tiny handprints smudged, but deliberate ran along the left wall like a trail, and above them, in uneven red paint, Hale lied. Luis exhaled slowly. Jesus, Amina turned to him. Jonas left the trail. Not random. He's leading us. They moved carefully through the tunnel, until they reached a side chamber where something flickered. Amina stepped in and gasped. The walls were covered in strings, yarn, dozens of loops. Braids twist-tied between old nails, rocks, and even pieces of glass wedged into the wall, like a three-dimensional web of thought. This is how he talks, she whispered. Luis pointed to a central braid. 6 threads woven tightly, one for each color of the students' jackets. He's mapping them, Amina said. Tracking where they were taken. Then she saw it dangling from a loop near the far wall, another Braille flashcard. She turned it over. CLIMB, she looked up. Above, through a shaft barely a foot wide, she saw light filtering in. A secondary exit. Luis tested the opening. Too narrow for him, but a child could fit. Amina scanned the cave again. Jonas had found shelter here. Had stayed long enough to build this. He wasn't panicking. He was trying to communicate. Jonas didn't vanish, she murmured. He ran. He tried to get help. Louise raised an eyebrow, but from who? Back. In Edgeview, Evan Rourke's name was finally surfacing. Anonymous whistleblowers had tipped off a reporter. Shell companies, ghost invoices, illegal diversion of school funds, particularly from special education programs. Rourke hadn't been seen in 36 hours. The last person he called, Samira Hale. Police searched her home again and found a crumpled envelope in the trash, one of Rourke's campaign flyers. With "You will regret this," scrawled in pen across the back. But that wasn't all. In Samira's filing cabinet, tucked behind lesson plans and parent contact logs, were dozens of Polaroids, unlabeled UNNUMBERED. Each showed Jonas. Alone. On the school bus, in the hallway, on field trips, always from a distance. It wasn't surveillance. It was documentation. Witnessing. A record, because Jonas wasn't invisible to Bezemeyer. She had seen him, which meant she may have trusted him to do what no one else could. Flashback: 1 week before the trip. Jonas. Samira whispered in the classroom after the others had left, kneeling beside his desk. I know you hear everything. I know you understand more than people give you credit for. She gently placed a ball of red yarn in his hand. If something happens, I want you to take care of the others. Can you do that? Jonas didn't. Nod. He just started to braid. Present. Luis and Amina returned to the surface just before dusk. Breath steaming, arms scratched. The sky was a copper smear above the treetops. We're not just dealing with a kidnapping, Amina said quietly. This is bigger, political, personal, financial, and Jonas's the wild card. Luis nodded. You think he's alive? I think he's the only one who knows where they are. Her phone buzzed. New voicemail. No caller ID. Distorted voice. They don't belong in that world. I brought them where they'd be safe. Click. Amina's jaw clenched. Jonas hadn't taken the kids. Someone else had, but Jonas had managed to escape, which meant he was running, hiding, leaving a trail. And if they followed it carefully, if they listened the way Samira had, they might just find him before the mountains swallowed his voice forever. The rain had stopped, but it hadn't left quietly. Tree limbs sagged under the weight of waterlogged leaves, the air thick with petrichor and unease, the kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace, more like a held breath. Detective Amina Qureshi sat in the back of Edgeview High's special education classroom. Her hands gloved, flashlight sweeping over the desk Jonas Hale had once claimed. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and crayon wax. A corkboard behind his chair bore laminated cards. Sit, wait, ask for help, calm corner. All the tools built for a child. The world never tried to understand, but in the bottom drawer of the small filing cabinet beside his seat, she found something the school never noticed. A cloth pouch, heavy. Inside, flashcards, handmade, each in braille, but with marker scrawlings across the bottom. Amina flipped through them, one after another. LIRLOKBHIN-DR-U-ND-O-N-T, TRST, HRSA paused. Her Samira Hale. That didn't track. Every clue so far had pointed to her. As protector, not perpetrator. But then again, wasn't it strange that the only adult with the kids had also disappeared without a trace? And the restraining order, filed, but never followed up. No paper trail beyond the initial form, and no copy ever served. Which meant what if it had never been about Rourke? What if it had been about Jonas? Sheriff Boone barged into the room, breath misting in the doorway. You'll want to see this, he said, waving a manila folder. Inside, a lab report. Soil analysis. Sample from the rope knots you found in the cabin, he said. They matched soil found on Rourke's boots, but also Samira Hale's. Amina raised a brow. That proves proximity, not guilt. Then what about this? He handed her a second report. Jonas's emergency beacon. It wasn't activated. It was manually wired into a motion sensor, like someone wanted it to trigger only when a door opened. So, Amina asked, already seeing where it led. Boone leaned closer. So either Jonas built that himself, or someone helped him. Flashback 4. Weeks earlier, Samira's apartment. She sat beside Jonas on the floor, red yarn spooled between them. Sometimes, she whispered, fingers moving with his. We need to tell truths in ways no one else can hear. She slid a small device toward him. A GPS tag. Keep it safe. Don't let them find it until you need help. Jonas nodded not to her, but to the rhythm forming between his fingers. Back in the present, Luis Ortega's voice crackled over the radio. I found something. Northeast ravine, 3 miles from the mine. Another set of cards, this time, not Jonas's. Amina's ears perked. Go on, one says, in plain text. We were told to trust her. We shouldn't have. And another says, she talks to the man in the suit. Amina's pulse quickened. Bag everything. I'm heading there now. As she approached the site, rain-soaked ferns slapped her legs. The ravine narrowed into a gully choked with rotted leaves and twisted branches. Luis met her at the mouth of a shallow cave. His flashlight beam caught something on the wall, a series of childlike drawings made with charcoal and crushed berries. One figure tall, smiling, labeled S.1 figure in a suit. Labeled E.8, small. Figures in a line. all labeled with initials, LEJMKSBR, dot and one figure in the corner, drawn with string wrapped around the limbs, .J.AMINAS. Mouth went dry. Jonas thought Samira betrayed him. Maybe she did, Louise said. Or maybe he saw something he didn't understand and filled in the blanks. Amina turned, or maybe someone made him think she did. Louise stepped deeper into the cave. There's more. He reached into a crevice and pulled out a flashcard. This one, wet and damaged, but still legible. BRING, HRBIC. Kamina stared at it. This wasn't an accusation, it was a plea. Elsewhere, Evan Rourke was running through an abandoned ranger path. Sweat slicking his face, suit coat soaked, phone dead. He hadn't eaten in a day. Not since the texts started. Untraceable numbers. Photos from the camp. Then a single message. You said they wouldn't get hurt. He knew what he had done. He'd given Samira the wrong coordinates, offered her extra funding for her independent weekend program. He'd made it all sound noble, healing, but the true plan had been darker and messier. He hadn't expected Jonas to be a problem. He hadn't expected kids to fight back. He hadn't expected the strings. Back in Edgeview, Amina sat in her car, rereading a message just emailed from Samira's sister. Samira kept talking about how the system was going to eat her kids. Said she was being watched. Said someone was tampering with the IEP files. EIP, individualized education plans, private, protected, and stored on Edgeview's local server. Amina raced to the school. In the dusty server room, she pulled hard drives and called in techs. They dug deep and found edits. Rourke had changed classifications, removed diagnoses, made several students ineligible for state funding, so their removal wouldn't trigger flags. Paperwork vanished, and so did the kids, because officially they didn't exist anymore. Amina stared at the files, heart pounding. The entire trip, a cover, the camp, a transfer point. Jonas, the only one who noticed the paper trail before it was erased, and Samira, possibly dead, possibly running, possibly the only one who tried to stop it all as she stepped outside. Her phone buzzed. A single new photo. Untraceable number. A candlelit room. 8 children, huddled together. One hand raised, holding a flashcard. Jonas is coming. The mountain had gone. Still, again, no birds, no wind. Not even the distant hum of power lines. Just a hush so heavy it seemed to press down on the trees, like they were being told to listen. Detective Amina Qureshi had seen war zones. With more comfort than this, she stood before the rusted iron gate of Cabin 6, a structure so forgotten it didn't exist on any ranger schematic. Not even Ortega's worn ledger had mentioned it. But Jonas had. Tied into the red yarn, looped around that rock formation by the gully, was a handmade cardwet. Almost ruined, but readable under a UV lamp. Cabin where trees don't whisper. Luis Ortega, at her side, adjusted the strap on his rifle. Locals used to call this the hollow. Said, nothing grows right here. No bird's nest, no echo. Folklore, Amina replied. But her voice faltered. Because, as they stepped past the gate, the air really did feel, wrong. Thick, like syrup. Like it didn't want them there. Cabin 6 sat hunched beneath a broken pine, windows blacked out. Padlock freshly snapped. Who opened it? She whispered. Luis didn't answer. They breached the door slowly. Sweeping lights over what looked like a child's fever dream of a classroom. 8 chairs. 8 clipboards, all neatly labeled, with the missing kids' names. On a side table, laminated behavior charts, each marked in red. Compliant, compliant, aggressive, silent. The walls were plastered in instructional posters, cheap knockoffs of therapeutic guides, but warped, twisted. Words like reward, silence, obedience scribbled over smiling cartoon faces. A fake school. Amina stepped toward a corner where the wallpaper peeled. Behind it, a two-way mirror, smashed from the inside. Jonas, she whispered. Luis tapped his flashlight to signal, found a hatch. In the floor, beneath a rug bolted sealed, but forced open recently. They climbed down. The basement stank of mold and old paint. 8 sleeping mats, bare, no sheets, all facing the same direction. On one, she found a single thread of red yarn, tied in a loop. Jonas had been here. Louise called again from the back room. You need to see this. Amina stepped into a concrete cell, barely 6 feet long, blood on the corner wall, finger height. Not splatter smear. Below it, drawn in red crayon. Don't listen to her. Amina turned, her throat burned. Her again. Always her, could be Samira, Louise said gently. Or someone pretending to be her. She looked around. No signs of recent occupation. They were here, but they left, or were moved. Amina's radio buzzed, static, then a voice. A child's whisper. Cabin, not safe. He said not to stay, run, then silence. They ran out of the cabin into the woods, breath clouding like ghosts around them. Behind them, cabin 6 stood like a curse carved into wood. Then the sound, not loud, not close, but wrong, clack, clack. Drag. Luis raised his rifle. What was that? Amina froze. The sound repeated, a metallic scraping, and then a flash of red through the trees. Jonas, she shouted. No answer, but the dragging sound retreated. Luis took chase. Amina followed, ducking under low-hanging branches, then a clearing, and there, in the center, a wheelchair, empty, spun, slightly to the left. A red hoodie tied to the armrest. Same one from the camp, Luis panted. Amina approached, cautiously, on the seat, a folded card. I tried to keep them safe. Suddenly, the forest shifted. A rustle, a blur, and then, from the far side of the trees a boy, small, muddied, breathing hard. Jonas. Amina dropped to one knee. Jonas, it's okay, you're safe now, we're here. Jonas didn't move closer, just stared at her, wide-eyed. Done. Slowly, he pulled a string from around his wrist, and held it up. 7 loops. One broken. Amina's heart cracked. One missing. She whispered. He nodded. Then he pointed knots behind them. But up toward the ridge above the cabin. Luis followed the direction with binoculars. I see smoke, he said. Another structure, maybe. One we missed. Jonas held up another card. Dirt-stained, trembling. They took her, Samira. Amina asked. He nodded again. Then pointed to Amina's bag. She dug through it until she found the card Jonas had made days ago, hidden in the cave. Bring her back Kane. Now it made sense. This wasn't a warning, it was a mission. They left Jonas in a ranger unit with medics and a trauma therapist. He refused to speak, but wrote one more card before they left. Hurry. Amina and Luis hiked toward the ridge. The path narrowed. Roots gnarled around their ankles like grasping fingers. And then they found a hunting lodge, half buried in brush, off-grid, stone walls and dark windows. Old, but not abandoned. On the porch, a rocking chair creaked in the breeze. Inside, they didn't know yet, but the truth was waiting in walls that didn't echo. In rooms where children had been trained like animals. In the place where trees no longer whispered. Because they had seen too much, he always wore a suit, even out here. Deep in the woods, where mud swallowed shoes and rain peeled paint off the bones of forgotten buildings, he wore a suit. The kids had called him the quiet man. He never raised his voice, never ran, never touched them directly, but his presence was heavy. He didn't need to speak to be terrifying. He was the one who turned obedience into a game. He was the one who rewarded silence. He was the one who watched. The lodge creaked, like it was breathing. Detective Amina Qureshi crouched low behind a broken cabinet on the main floor. Her eyes scanned the layout, worn furniture, threadbare rugs, and a wall covered in landscape paintings, cheap prints, masking seams in the wall. Luis Ortega swept the back hallway with his rifle. One entrance. 2 possible exits, he whispered. Power's running off a generator out back. Recent fuel. They've been here. Amina reached the staircase. The wood moaned under her foot. She stopped, listened, unheard it. A low metronome-like hum. Click, click, click. They followed it to a side room, where they found a projector spinning without film. The screen was blank, but something had been playing till minutes ago. On the desk beside it, a tape recorder. Still warm, Amina pressed play. Day 6. Layla continues resisting non-verbal cues. Will double her sessions. Jonas remains unpredictable. Samira interferes again. She must understand order requires cost. The voice was calm, clinical. The tone of a man who believed he was fixing the world. Luis muttered, Jesus Christ. Amina's jaw tensed. He's running a behavior mod program, off the books, using ABA methods warped beyond recognition. On kids who couldn't even consent. She opened a drawer. Flashcards, not made by the children for the children. Each had only one word, .obey, .stop, .comply, .smile, the opposite of every card Jonas had left behind. Samira didn't betray them, Amina said softly. She was protecting them from him. Luis pointed to the back of the tape recorder. Initials scratched into the casing. ER. Evan Rourke. Flashback. 6 weeks ago. A private meeting. A dim room. Two people. Samira Hale sat across from Rourke. Her hands trembled. You're rewriting their files, she whispered. He smiled faintly. We're optimizing placement, reducing waste, streamlining support. You're erasing them. No, I'm giving them a chance to function in the real world. You, of all people, should understand. She stood, voice shaking. You touch them again, and I go public. Rourke didn't flinch. You go public, you die in the woods. Present, Amina found a trapdoor beneath a rug in the main bedroom. Luis opened it slowly. Below stairs, cold, concrete, dry air that didn't belong to the forest. They descended with caution. At the bottom, a corridor with metal doors on either side, converted storage cells. Inside, abandoned sleeping cots. Torn clipboards, buckets for bathrooms. One cell had names carved into the wall. Layla, Mila, Sareem, Bella, Jordan, Caden, Roxy. Samira's name wasn't there, but a message was. He said, silence is survival. Louise murmured, you think he was conditioning them? Not just conditioning, Amina said. He was preparing them. For something. For someone. Suddenly, Luis raised his fist. Wait. Sound. They froze. Shuffle then. A voice. Faint. Raspy singing. They followed the sound to the far end of the corridor. A locked door. Amina knelt. It's coming from the vent. Someone's in there. Luis kicked the door open. Inside, in the corner, huddled under a grey blanket Samira. Hale, alive, eyes wild, pale lips. Chapped, she blinked in disbelief, as though they were ghosts come to collect her. I told them, she rasped. I told them not to trust him. Amina rushed over, wrapped a thermal blanket around her. You're safe now, but Samira shook her head. No, he's not finished, Rourke. Amina asked, but Samira said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a camera in the corner, red light, blinking. He's watching us. 3 miles away. A black SUV cut through the forest road. Behind the wheel, Evan Rourke, suit pristine. He watched the cabin from a distance, eyes narrowed. The operation was compromised, but he still had one card left. The boy. Jonas. Back at the cabin, Amina moved Samira to the main floor as medics arrived. Samira gripped her wrist. Jonas escaped. He led you here. He remembers everything. I know. Samira's eyes darkened, but Rourke knows that too. He'll come for him. Lucid. Phone buzzed. An alert. Ranger unit for breached. Jonas is gone. Amina's stomach dropped. She stepped outside, just in time to hear the sound of an engine fading into the woods. A trail of yarn, barely visible in the headlights, flooded like a fuse burning in reverse. Jonas hadn't been taken. He had followed. The game wasn't over, not yet. The sky over Edgeview turned to bruised velvet as darkness swallowed the ridge. Detective Amina Qureshi stood, frozen beside the still swinging door of the Ranger unit, breath fogging, boots rooted in disbelief. Jonas was gone again, but not taken. Followed. Like he always did. Following threads no one else could see. Luis. Ortega emerged from the cabin, face pale. Jonas left a note. He said quietly, holding up a damp card. He's missing a loop. Took it, lips pressed thin. He thinks one of the kids didn't make it. Louise nodded, and he's going after Rourke alone. Her jaw clenched. He won't survive that. Not again. Louise handed her another piece of evidence found in the back of the cabin. A small child's shoelace. Tied in Jonas's signature knot style, but this one had 7 loops. And a brass shell casing looped into the center. A warning. A symbol. Or both. Jonas knows Rourke is armed, Louise murmured. Amina's voice dropped to a whisper. And he's not running anymore. He's preparing for war. Meanwhile, in a hidden clearing, lit only by high beams, Evan Rourke stood by his SUV, watching Jonas from 20 feet away. Jonas didn't speak, didn't move. He simply stood, hoodie soaked, hands balled into fists. Rain had stopped, but the smell of gun, oil and pine needles hung heavy in the air. Rourke took a step closer. I didn't want to hurt anyone, Jonas, he said softly. You have to understand, you weren't supposed to remember. Jonas tilted his head. Rourke continued. I gave her everything, Samira. I made her important and she turned the children against me. He reached into his coat pocket, not fast, not slow, calm, practiced. Jonas didn't flinch. Rourke pulled out a loop of red yarn. I kept this. The first one you gave her. He stepped closer. You understand what I'm doing, don't you? Order, purpose. No more screaming. No more chaos. Jonas finally moved. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded card. You don't get to erase us. Back at the cabin, Amina and Louise tracked the GPS transmitter Jonas had hidden in his shoes, the one Samira had secretly sewn into the lining months ago. Its signal was weak, erratic, but it was moving, heading toward the quarry. A stretch of land closed off after a dynamite mishap 5 years ago. No one went near it anymore, no one but the ones who didn't want to be found. Amina whispered, that's where he's taking him. The drop site. Louise loaded his rifle. We move now. At the quarry, the moonlight broke through mist like a spotlight on a stage that hadn't been used in years. Jonas stood on the rim, red yarn trailing from one wrist. At his feet, 7 braided loops. The 8th, the final one, was tied tightly. Around a stone, Rourke emerged from the shadows, gun in hand. No longer pretending. No suit jacket. Just fury in his eyes. You think this is justice? He barked. You think anyone will believe a mute autistic child over a decorated official? Jonas didn't answer. He simply dropped the stone. The 8th loop vanished into the quarry. Then came the click. Amina's sidearm cocked from behind. Drop the gun, she said coldly. Rourke spun, startled, but didn't lower the weapon. You think this changes anything? He spat. The files are gone. The funding's moved. These kids don't even exist on paper. Louise stepped out from the other side. That's the thing about paper. It burns, but knots, remember. Jonas slowly stepped back, placing himself between Rourke and the cliff. Rourke's voice broke. I gave them structure. Without me, they were just noise. Amina didn't blink. You turned them into test subjects. Rourke raised the gun toward Jonas. Then froze. Jonas held up a final flashcard. One word. Enough. And then a flash of movement. Samira. From the side ridge. She tackled Rourke just as he fired. The shot rang out. Ricocheted. Louise dove in, wresting the gun from Rourke's hand. By the time the dust settled, Rourke lay on his back, bleeding from a head wound. Barely. Jonas stood still, staring down at him. No fear, just something ancient in his expression. Kind of peace, the kind that comes when a knot finally unravels. Later that night. Amna sat beside Jonas at the ranger unit, watching him draw. 7 loops. One for each student, one braided tighter than the rest for Samira. She looked at him gently. Do you want to say anything? Jonas didn't speak, but he did hand her one last card. She heard me first. Amina smiled, tears quietly streaking her cheeks. She always did. Evan Rourke would later be indicted on 11 counts of child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the state. Edgeview would never be the same. And the kids, they were safe, healing, together. Not forgotten, not erased, because of Jonas. Because sometimes, the quietest child in the room turns out to be the loudest scream. The morning after everything fell apart was so quiet, it hurt. No sirens. No barking radios. Just the rustling of leaves under a breeze that, for once, didn't sound like it was hiding something. The forest exhaled, so did Edgeview, and so did Jonas. He sat beneath a tree behind the ranger station, knees to chest, watching, his fingers pull and tighten a fresh red thread. The loops were neater, now less frantic, tighter, steadier. Each one held a name: Layla, Miller, Caden, Roxy, Bella, Sareem, Jordan, and at the center, tied into the braid, like a heartbeat, Samira. Hele. Inside the station, Detective Amina Qureshi reviewed her final report. The truth was down on paper now, but the facts still trembled like live wires. Evan Rourke orchestrated the trip as a cover for a covert behavioral experiment funded through siphoned special education grants. 8 disabled children were taken to a fake camp and subjected to psychological conditioning. Samira Hale, who initially trusted Rourke's promises, turned against him and paid dearly for it. Jonas Hale escaped, hid, fought, and led them back. No adult in Edgeview would ever be able to say again, he doesn't understand. Because Jonas had understood everything. A week later, the town gathered in the school auditorium. Not for a memorial though, it could have been but for a reckoning. 7 children sat front row, flanked by guardians, therapists, and a sea of unfamiliar cameras. Samira, still recovering from her injuries, was met with a standing ovation the moment she stepped onto the stage. Her voice was softer now, but firm. We were told to keep quiet, that compliance was safety. But silence almost got us killed. She looked directly at the superintendent, the mayor, and the parents in the crowd. Jonas saved us. Because no one ever taught him how to lie. Applause, tears, shame. Some people left early, most didn't. Outside afterward, Jonas stood beneath a tree, looking up into the branches. Amina approached slowly. You okay? He didn't look at her, but he held something out. A final flashcard. Are we safe now? Amina knelt beside him. She didn't answer right away, because the real answer was complicated. Rourke was in federal custody. But others, those who signed off, looked away, stayed quiet, they were still out there. The system hadn't changed. Not yet, but this was a start. I think we're safer than we were, she said, because of you. He nodded, and finally, after 10 days of silence, he spoke, one word, not loud, not sharp, but whole. Loop. Amina blinked. Loop. He nodded again, and tied one more. A new thread, not just for the kids, not for the trauma, not for the story. The world would twist into headlines, but for himself. Flash forward 6 months later, a feature in Time magazine. Read. The Boy Who Spoke in Knots. How one autistic child exposed a multi-state abuse ring. Jonas never read it. But his new school, small, specialized, built around his needs and not someone else's metrics, had a place on the wall where his red thread art hung. Sam, IRA taught there now, so did Layla's father, who left his job at the local bank to become a pereducator. The trauma had bent them all but in bending. They connected. Loops in a chain, threads in a web. People who refused to forget Amina visited sometimes. Not often, just enough. Jonas never hugged her, but he always handed her a new card. Each one said something different. One said truth. Another said, noise isn't always bad. And one, her favorites, said simply, thank you for listening. Back in Edgeview, the woods had begun to grow again. Cabin 6 was demolished. The quarry sealed. The old mine reinforced and turned into a memorial site, but some things were left untouched. Amina returned there once, just to see it. In a hollowed-out tree near Blackwood Ridge, she found a new set of strings, fresh, clean, fluttering like prayer flags, each one a message. None of them in English, but all of them understood, because Jonas didn't just escape, he didn't just survive, he rewrote the story, and somewhere deep in the forest, far from anyone trying to forget what happened, A loop tightened, then another, until the thread was whole again. They called it closure, but Detective Amina Qureshi knew better. There's no such thing when the wounds are invisible. When trauma lives behind quiet smiles, stimming hands, and flash cards held up instead of tears. What happened in Edgeview hadn't been tied off neatly. It had only been paused, and sometimes. The scariest part of a story wasn't the monster. It was realizing how many people watched it happen and said nothing. 3 weeks after the public hearing, the case should have been done. Rourke was awaiting trial. His associates were under investigation. The children were in care. Samira was recovering. But then came the envelope, unmarked, delivered to Amina's desk by someone who claimed a kid in a red hoodie gave this to me on the bus. Inside, a map of the Edgeview forest. A Polaroid, blurry, dark, 8 children huddled, but not the 8 from the known case, and a flashcard. Look again. Amina sat with it all night, heart pounding. She called Luis at 2 a.m. What if Rourke wasn't working alone? She said. What if there were other camps? Luis groaned. Please tell me you're not suggesting he was moving kids who no longer existed on paper. What if those weren't the only ones he erased? Luis cursed under his breath. You think Jonas knew? Amina paused. I think Jonas knows now. Jonas hadn't spoken again since that single-word loop, but his language had evolved. Now, it was patterns. In the new therapy center, he began weaving large installations threads stretched between nails, cardboard shapes tucked into the design. Some thought it was art, but Samira noticed something chilling. Every piece had 8 clusters, and then suddenly, a 9th. Amina arrived the next day with a fresh notebook. She sat beside Jonas as he worked silently with red yarn. Is this new? She asked. Jonas didn't respond, but he handed her a card. I remember the boy with the green hat. Amina blinked. That wasn't one of the 8, was it? He shook his head. Luis, watching from the hallway, paled. Green hat. That's from the Polaroid in the envelope. Amina turned to Jonas. Where? Jonas reached into his sleeve and pulled out another card. This one wet on the edges like he'd carried it during a rainstorm. There's still 1 thread left. 2 days later, they returned to the forest. Back to the ridge above the mine, where everything had begun. But this time, Jonas led. He didn't speak, he walked, hands brushing trees, fingers twitching toward knots only he could see. He led them to a hollowed log, tapped it twice and pointed. Amina knelt inside. Carefully coiled in a plastic bag was a red shoelace tied into a 7-loop braid, and 1 loose end dangling. Attached was a card. B. Left behind. Luis muttered. B. Bella. No, Amina said. Bella's safe. This is someone else. Jonas nodded. Then pointed again. Deeper into the trees, they reached the old ranger's outpost, burned down years ago, officially condemned. But as Amina approached, she saw fresh footprints. Mud tracked in but not out. She kicked the door. Inside the smell. Hit first, pine needles, rot, and something else, life in a corner. Curled like a sleeping fawn under blankets and wrappers. A boy, tiny, pale eyes wide, wearing a faded green knit cap. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He held a loop of yarn in his hands. His name bracelet read, Benny. Jonas stepped forward and knelt across from him. He offered a new card from his pocket. You're not alone. And finally, Benny moved. He tied the end of his string to Jonas's. The 9th loop. That night, back at the station, Amina updated her report. Another child saved, another thread knotted, but she knew now this story wouldn't end in a file folder. Because the systems were still broken, the wolves wore badges, lanyards, ties, sometimes even smiles. And the people who stopped them were kids, teachers, detectives who listened to yarn instead of words. As for Jonas, he finished his final project. A week later, a mural of threads stretching from wall to wall, each loop a name, each knot a voice. In the center, a mirror, so that anyone looking into it would see themselves. And remember, silence is never neutral. Epilogue. 1 year later, Review changed, slowly, unevenly, But it changed. The new school bore Samira Hales. Name. Louise became head of a special unit dedicated to crimes against vulnerable children. Amina testified before Congress. Rourke died in federal prison under suspicious circumstances. No one cried. And Jonas built things. Art. Patterns. Warning signs. Because he knew, there's always another loop. Always another thread. Waiting to be pulled. They used to call them lost children, runaways, flight risks, special needs dropouts, untrackable kids. Shuffled between schools, group homes, temporary placements, no one noticed when they vanished, because the world had never really counted them in the first place, but Jonas had. Every thread, every knot, every name, and now every silence. It began with a letter, handwritten, no return address, delivered to the Edgeview Community Center a month after Benny was rescued. Inside, a list, 18 names, ages 6 to 15, each with a red mark beside it. At the bottom, just one sentence: the system swallowed them. We remember. Detective Amir Qureshi stared at the list in silence. The names didn't match any known case files. No school records, no birth certificates. They'd been erased before they were even entered. Ghost files, Luis Ortega muttered. Names from institutions that shut down years ago. Amina placed the letter next to Jonas's latest creation on the wall, a sprawling web of thread knots, crisscrossing like constellations. At the far edge of the pattern, barely visible, was a new section, unconnected, floating 18 empty loops. Samira Hale returned to the cabin that week not as a fugitive or a victim, but as an advocate. She stood in front of the charred remains of Cabin 6, now cleared and roped off, and gave a short speech to the gathered press. They called our kids nonverbal, but they screamed in every way they could. You didn't hear them, he did. She gestured toward Jonas, standing quietly at her side. He counted the ones you erased. That night, the wind stirred through the forest like breath through teeth. Jonas sat on the porch of his new home, actual home, this time, with curtains and books and Samira cooking real food inside. He held the letter in his lap, tracing each name with a finger. Then he began looping again. Not with red yarn, but black. Amina visited the next morning. That new, she asked, pointing to the darker thread. Jonas nodded. She knelt beside him. Is this for the ones we haven't found? He pulled a flashcard from his pocket. The ones who never got cards. Her throat tightened. 3 days later, something unexpected arrived at the Edgeview station. A flash drive. Encrypted. Luis cracked it in hours. Inside, folders of scanned files, therapy logs, placement records, transport rosters, all deleted from public systems over the past decade. Amina scrolled through them, hand over her mouth. This isn't just Rourke, this is bigger. Luis frowned. How did Jonas get this? He didn't. Someone else had. Someone watching. Listening. Jonas had lit the fuse. Now others were following the thread at the school. Jonas's latest installation drew national attention. A long black hallway hung with 18 suspended loops. Each time a missing name was confirmed. The loop turned red. By week's end, 3 loops had turned. A reporter asked Samira, "Is this art?" She answered simply, "It's memory, it's evidence, it's a reckoning." Months passed. Cases reopened. Grants frozen. Special education reforms proposed across 5 states. But Jonas, he'd never stopped weaving. Sometimes, in the early morning hours, he'd slip a card under Amina's door, not with names, but with reminders. Count them. Listen to the quiet ones. We're still here, and sometimes, they still need help. One rainy night, Amina visited Jonas without warning. He was already awake, sitting at the table, string between his fingers like a violinist. Practicing in silence, she sat down, soaked, silent. He handed her a new card. "Are you tired?" She smiled faintly. "So tired." He nodded, then held up another card. "Keep pulling the thread." 1 year later, the Jonas Hale Foundation opened its first permanent center for nonverbal and neurodivergent youth. No bells. No harsh lights. No compliance charts. Just soft hands, open space, and yarn dash everywhere. On opening day, Jonas stood beside a mural made of thousands of loops. At the center, 18 black ones. A child asked, "What are those for?" Jonas handed her a card. "The ones we're still looking for." She asked, "Will you find them?" He answered, for the second time in his life, with a single word, "Yes." Because some voices aren't loud, some heroes don't yell, and some stories aren't told in headlines. They're stitched, quietly, patiently, loop by loop, thread by thread, until the whole world finally sees the shape of what it tried to ignore. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.